Massive protests across the country have health officials concerned today. Hear why many of the nation's top medical experts are worried these demonstrations could lead to a large second-wave outbreak of police brutality. From The Onion and Onion Public Radio, I'm Leslie Price, and this is The Topical. We've got the latest on each one of the many things you should currently be panicking about, so stay with us. Well, it seems the worst could still be ahead of us, as health officials offered a grim outlook for the future today, with a warning that protests currently roiling the nation could set off a second wave of police brutality. For more, I'm joined by OPR correspondent Marcy Hammond. Marcy, is this something we should be concerned about?
Well, Leslie, experts say there is cause for alarm. Here's Deputy CDC Director Ann Schuchat.
We've seen massive in-person demonstrations across the country in the last several days, which is, of course, a fertile breeding ground for excessive force. And what's worse, we believe that this second spike in police brutality could be even deadlier than what we've already seen.
That does sound concerning. Now, Marcy, can you give us a little more context? How did we find ourselves in this situation? Where did this police brutality come from?
Well, of course, some form of police brutality has been with us basically forever, but over centuries of exposure, the American public has largely become immune to it. However, this novel strain that we're seeing this year began with seemingly isolated appearances throughout the country over the last several months and is now boiled over into a full-blown epidemic.
So what should we be on the lookout for if we think we may have been afflicted by excessive force?
Well, the most important thing to note is that if you're feeling symptoms, it may already be too late. Here's Deputy Director Schuchat on what exactly to watch out for.
There are a variety of symptoms, some of which include puffy, swollen eyes, cracked ribs, an inability to breathe, and in many cases, death. We're seeing a huge uptick in these symptoms in hospitals and ICUs across the country, which have already been stretched to their breaking point by our militarized police force.
Oh, well, fortunately, I don't have any of those symptoms. Am I in the clear?
Not necessarily, Leslie. Schuchat also cautioned that there are a large number of asymptomatic carriers who can actually be among the most dangerous as they continue to spread systemic violence and oppression while not even being conscious of it.
Well, as a healthy white man, I'm not too concerned. But, Marcy, are there any populations that are particularly vulnerable to this epidemic?
Interestingly enough, the CDC has found that the African American community has been affected disproportionately. But really, it can affect anyone. Pets, the elderly, even children.
And what are officials recommending in the event that you do become exposed?
Here's Schuchat from the CDC once more.
If you've been afflicted, we urge you to remain physically and emotionally isolated and avoid all large-scale demonstrations against state-sanctioned violence until physical evidence has healed. Unfortunately, this isn't going away anytime soon, so we're going to have to accept police brutality as part of our future, since any potential cure could be decades away and would likely be extremely expensive.
Interesting. So is refraining from protests the key to preventing the second wave?
Well, it may lead to a temporary lull in incidents, but it's important to remember police brutality is extremely prevalent, and it can strike vulnerable populations while they're walking through their neighborhood, sitting in their backyard, or even asleep in their own bedroom. So unfortunately, there's really no sure way to escape it.
All right. Well, thanks for the reporting, Marcy, and stay safe out there. That's OPR's Marcy Hammond. We'll be back in a moment. As coronavirus cases continue to grow throughout the U.S., one state has decided to take drastic measures to overcome the pandemic. Earlier this week, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis used his executive power to deploy the state's National Guard to force residents back into malls, movie theaters, and other businesses. Joining us now with more details is OPR's Remy Birkeland. Remy, what led to this decision by the governor?
Well, Leslie, Florida officials say they're taking these measures after millions of residents continued to avoid open restaurants and bars and blatantly ignored government guidelines to get back out there and save the economy. I spoke to Jeff Pemberton, a representative from Governor DeSantis' office, who had this to say.
No one wanted it to come to this, but the state's residents left us no choice. So the governor has signed an emergency measure that sends troops to our hardest hit areas to make sure people there are getting out of their house and staying in stores until they buy something.
Remy, aren't these actions a little extreme?
They are, and Pemberton acknowledged that this will unfortunately cause a huge blow to the state's population, but he insists that practicing social consumerism is the state's only option to stop this plague of economic downturn. Here's Jeff Pemberton again.
Simply put, irresponsible people are not taking the government advisories seriously. By refusing to take the family to the Cheesecake Factory for dinner and pick up a few things at Crate and Barrel on the way home, we're putting all kinds of corporations in danger. We are at a breaking point where these rules must be enforced.
The new measure also makes it illegal for the state's 21 million residents to congregate in restaurants and food courts with fewer than 10 people. And the National Guard is authorized to question any individual who doesn't look like they've had a haircut in a while or whose roots are showing to make sure they've made an appointment at a local salon or barbershop. If they haven't, those who are looking shaggy are subject to a $200 fine and will be taken to the nearest Supercuts.
Wow, even if they're trying to grow it out?
That's right.
Sounds so draconian. How are Floridians responding to these new regulations?
For some residents, the governor's executive order is already taking a toll.
Look, I realize that keeping the economy going is more important than everyone's health, but there has to be a balance. I just don't need any more scented body lotion from Bath and Body Works.
I've bowled 8 games in a row. I don't know how much more my arm can take, but they told me they'd shoot me with beanbag guns if I didn't pay to reserve the lane for the whole week.
I'm immunocompromised. You can't make me go to the theater to see Onward. I have rights.
Sir, Onward is the kind of heartfelt blockbuster that will make you laugh and cry and is perfect for the whole family. Now, if you do not buy your ticket to the 4:45 screening and then slowly make your way over to the concession stand to purchase a large popcorn, drink, and candy of your choice, we will use force.
While some people can be incredibly selfish.
Yes, and unfortunately, there are some large groups of protesters trying to defy the orders. We have some audio of the National Guard moving in on a crowd of people who were trying to leave a mall in Orlando without the required number of full shopping bags.
Show me your receipts.
I just came to the mall to window shop.
Ma'am, we could do this the easy way or the hard way, but you're going to go into that nail salon and you're going to pamper yourself.
The National Guard were finally able to control the crowd by using tear gas to corner them in a sunglass hut until they all bought Ray-Bans.
It's sad that this is what it takes to get some people to do what's right for the economy. But Remy, are officials worried that this could lead to an increase in coronavirus cases?
They're taking that into account, but Pemberton noted that those who will suffer the most will be the poor and people in nursing homes, and they don't have that much money to spend anyway.
Well, that's not so bad then. Thank you, Remy. That's OPR's Remy Berglund. Back in a moment. Mental health experts are issuing new recommendations for those of you having trouble at night and are now advising Americans to only use their bed for its sole intended purpose, shooting amateur pornography. We're joined now by OPR senior health correspondent Jenna Resnick, who's going to help explain these new guidelines to us. Thanks for being here, Jenna.
Thanks for having me, Leslie.
Now, Jenna, I think I speak for everyone when I say we're all a little guilty of either working, eating, or sleeping in the comfort of our beds from time to time. Just last night, I spent a few hours polishing my collection of vintage Scooby-Doo figurines while lounging on my Twin XL. But why exactly should Americans refrain from doing these things and use their place of slumber solely for performing in unprofessional, self-made pornographic videos?
Well, Leslie, the more you do activities in your bed that aren't DIY adult filmmaking, the more your brain subconsciously associates your bed with such activities. This can make it so that when it's time to actually turn on your cheap camcorder and deep dick a busty MILF or sit on the face of your hunky ex, you may find yourself unable to perform because your brain isn't in full-on fuck mode.
Ah, I see. So, for example, if I eat a lot in bed, then when it comes time to make a steamy interracial threesome video with bad acting and homemade costumes, I might have trouble popping a chub because I'll get hungry.
Exactly. Unless, of course, the porn you're doing involves food play, but that's a separate discussion.
Sure. Now, you mentioned that your brain makes associations with various behaviors. How does the science behind that work?
Well, I actually spoke to Ellen O'Connor, the head of psychology at Johns Hopkins, who helped write these new guidelines. And here's how she explained it.
Our brains undergo a phenomenon called priming, in which exposure to a stimulus prepares us for other related stimuli. So the more you film yourself getting dick down in your bed in grainy 480p, the more serotonin your brain will produce each future time you do this, which will allow you to get properly horned up for a full night shooting on a regular basis in accordance with your body's natural arousal cycles.
Wow, that's good to know. Now, let's say I have a bunch of these habits. How can I go about fixing them so I can make the sexiest step-sibling videos possible?
Well, therapists recommend practicing something called stimulus control, which helps you retrain your brain and its relation to your bed. In addition to only using your bed for POV masturbation videos, you should establish a regular shooting schedule. Only get in bed if you're actually horny. If you find yourself unable to get wet, you should get out of bed and only return when you're hungry for some cock. This will all help regulate your libido and ensure you're DTF when the camera is rolling. I actually got to speak to an amateur pornographer who spent the last few months practicing stimulus control. And here's how she said it changed her performances.
Oh my God, it's so much easier to shoot now. After I stopped working on my computer and looking at my phone in bed, my ass-eating skills have greatly improved. I'm squirting way longer, and I'm getting the best money shots of my career.
So you see, Leslie, at the end of the day, your bed is a sanctuary and one that should only be used for recording low-budget, hardcore tube videos with uneven, if not inaudible, sound levels.
Well, butter my buns and call me a biscuit. Thanks for the report, Jenna.
My pleasure.
That's OPR's Jenna Resnick. Back in a moment. Somebody better call in the National Guard because there's about to be a news riot. Here's what else we need to know today. In Shenzhen, China, local sweatshop worker Li Chen was reportedly devastated to hear the jacket she worked so hard on had been looted. Upon learning that the $85 jacket she'd labored endlessly over for 14 cents an hour had been stolen from a Zara retail store in the U.S., Chen was found to be inconsolable, but was comforted to learn that insurance covered the stolen item and Zara would be just fine. And in Washington, the looting continued last night as President Trump was spotted throwing a garbage can through the window of a local McDonald's before making off with about $2,000 worth of Big Macs. Later in the evening, Trump was reportedly spotted at a desecrated Baskin-Robbins that was later set ablaze. And finally, with many companies releasing statements of support for demonstrators this past week, Auntie Anne's is breaking from the pack, with the popular pretzel shop chain today calling for all protesters to be shot. Interesting take. And that's it for the Topical today. I'm Leslie Price. Well, folks, it's been quite a week here in the United States, and I just wanted to take a moment to say that in times like these, and in the face of unprecedented and long-standing pain, we here at Onion Public Radio are committed to acting as a balm of equality, searching evermore for a strive toward justice and equality. And justice. For there is no equal to justice, and it is justice that will prevail forevermore. So long as we love one another and ourselves, and those near to us, and those different from us too. And we stand with all that have been made hurt now and forevermore. Also, if anyone knows whether the restaurants in New York are going to be open this weekend, could you let me know in the reviews on Apple Podcast? I'm trying to do a brunch on Saturday. Open to recommendations, too. Just nothing too pricey. And bottomless mimosas are a plus. Love those. Anyway, have a great weekend, and we'll see you Monday. The news doesn't stop just because this YouTube video has. For even more on all the worst things happening in the world right now, listen and subscribe to The Topical on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, you insatiable news freaks.